What's up, guys? Today I wanted to do another Smash Brothers video, and I wanted to talk about a topic that has been very interesting to me recently. There's been a widespread debate about the next Smash game on whether or not it will be a full reboot or a continuation of Smash Bros. Ultimate like the Switch 2 edition, or just building on the rosters that they already have or something like that. For the sake of our conversation today, I'll just say there will be a Switch 2 edition because making an entirely different game with the same characters and mechanics and things like that would be very vague, but we kind of know what we would get with the Switch 2 edition. Most of them include better graphics, frame rates, and some additional DLC, which I know everyone wants to talk about more than anything. But the other enhancements would be nice too. Anyways, I see a lot of people talk about this on the internet, and I wanted to give my thoughts on it. First, let's start with the reboot idea. The reason that people think that it will possibly be a reboot for Smash Bros. Series is because of the current size of the roster. Smash Bros. Ultimate has 89 characters, which is a monumental achievement. As far as official games go, there are very few fighting games that actually reach this number of roster spots, especially in the modern day, with how long game development takes. On top of this, the director, Masahiro Sakurai, fought very hard for characters like Snake from Metal Gear Solid and Sora from Kingdom Hearts to be included in the game at all. Because of this, when the next Smash Bros. Game comes around, the two of them and several other third-party characters are not expected to return in the eyes of the fans, even though they are very much beloved characters. The idea that most people throw around is reducing the number of fighters to maybe 50, then adding 10 to 15 new fighters between base roster and DLC, and in the game around 65 fighters. This is a very good number, not only as a modern fighting game, but also for a platform. The thing that people have said as an idea to spice up this concept is that they would upgrade the existing moveset for legacy characters like Mario, Link, and Donkey Kong. Almost any character that was introduced in the original Smash Bros. On the Nintendo 64 or in Smash Bros. Melee for the GameCube kind of poorly reflects their games themselves, or at least their moveset poorly reflect that. The biggest example of this is Ganondorf, as his moveset, aside from his Final Smash Ultimate move in Smash Bros. Ultimate, is completely made up. This is frustrating for one of the most iconic bosses in all of video games. Even someone like Mario is not really all fleshed out as he could be. Aside from taunts, which don't really count as fighting game moves, his most modern move is when he pulls out the Flood attack from Mario Sunshine. Mario Sunshine came out in 2002. We've had over 20 years of Mario games since that game to pull from, and we haven't. Iconic moves like Cappy Throw from Mario Odyssey and the Spin Jump from Mario Galaxy could be great uses of other powers that he's been given in the games, and yet they never use any of them. So the general consensus is that people would be much more willing to reduce the roster or even pay to buy characters back for DLC over time, because that's the model they want to go with, if the characters that they return with have new movesets. This doesn't have to be for everyone. Characters like Meta Knight or Villager are pretty good adaptations for their games and don't really need to be changed. But there are definitely characters that need full moveset resets desperately. While I think that conceptually this is a good way to make a new Smash Bros. Game feel very fresh, I have a couple of issues with it. For one, there's a marketing problem here. If the selling gimmick of this game, other than just being Smash Bros. 6, is that old characters get new movesets, I don't think a lot of either parents or young kids that would be buying this game knows what that means. Only the people that regularly play video games or fighting games or something like that knows what that means. Compare this to Smash Bros. Ultimate, where even just the name could sell a kid better than something like Smash Bros. Reboot or Smash Bros. 6. The tagline for Smash Bros. Ultimate being "Everyone is here," even if a kid or parent doesn't know exactly what that means, it's still a sort of universal term that makes sense to people. If it says on the box, there's like 75 fighters, the most in a series, with all returning characters from past games. If they don't care about the past games, that still registers in their head more than the back of the box saying retooled movesets for old characters. Fans of the series, fighting games, or Nintendo in general would be thrilled, but it's not necessarily something that would get the general public excited. Now, this may not be a massive issue in the eyes of Nintendo because they know just as well as we do that a new Smash Bros. Game will sell 30 million copies or something crazy regardless of the quality or how well it's marketed or whatever it is. Just existing is enough for them to make billions of dollars, no doubt. However, there's one problem I have with this idea on a fundamental level. The problem I have with this idea is that there's no guarantee that this will happen. And here's what I mean by that. They've been hesitant to change the old Smash Bros. Fighters for a long time. Like I said, Mario's newest move is over 20 years old, and new characters like Kyra and Mithra or the Wii Fit Trainer or Terry Bogard feel very fleshed out and play like you would expect them to. So they clearly know how to make characters in the modern day feel like their modern counterparts. I think that there's some kind of issue in their heads that people will be upset and miss the old versions of the characters if they change them too much. Because of that, I'd be afraid if they went the reboot route, they would only change the roster and not the moveset. I could totally see them reducing the number of fighters and taking out a lot of third parties and adding in new ones and doing all that type of stuff. But there's no guarantee or any sort of sign or trust that they would ever do this and make new movesets for them. If someone gave you a choice to do one of these two options between new movesets or more characters with the old movesets being the same, then that's a different conversation. However, that's not really the conversation that we're having with Nintendo. It's just an idea, and while it's an idea that makes sense and a lot of people will get on board with, there's no reason for us to think that this is a viable option as far as a likelihood standpoint goes. However, if we move over to the Nintendo Switch 2 editions, I think that's a much more likely scenario. We've already seen many times that they take old games and move them onto the Switch 2 and give them better graphics, frame data, and DLC and improve the game's lifespan. They've already done this with games like Kirby and the Forgotten Land, Mario Party Jamboree, and even older titles like Breath of the Wild and Animal Crossing New Horizons. Because of that, I would have much more faith in them to do this idea than I would the reboot. They've shown in the past that they're not only willing to do this, but will do it for a lot of big games that don't have plans to make a new one for a while. They did the same thing for Mario Kart 8 Deluxe when they moved it from Wii U to Switch. That's why when we got Mario Kart World, it was so different from 8 because they knew that you could not only play it on the same console, but people would feel ripped off if they just got to repackage and retooled Mario Kart 8 again. If Mario Kart 9 had the same type of setup as Mario Kart 8 did, it would feel like a ripoff. So that's why they made the open world concept as a selling point. I actually think that a Switch 2 version of Smash Bros. Ultimate is more likely than an entirely new game. Like I said, they've not only done it before, but the timing is also very interesting. The director and creator of Smash Bros., Masahiro Sakurai, just finished making his latest game, that being Kirby Air Riders. So I don't think it's too far-fetched for them to do something where they create DLC and new version of Smash Bros. Ultimate. While he's been working on that game, then they call him back to do Smash Bros. 6 as a reboot, and it comes out in 2028, 2029, or something like that. And now for the verse of the day. Matthew 11:28 says, "Come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest." Smash Bros. Games usually come out within the first 2 years of any Nintendo console's lifespan, so I don't think that between November of 2025 and July of 2027 that they're going to make an entirely new Smash Bros. Games with Sakurai. I say this because Kirby Air Riders came out in November of last year. That's an extremely quick turnaround for a game this big, and while I'm sure they've done some groundwork for the game, no matter how far it is, if there are plans to bring back Sakurai for it, I can't see them doing years worth of work without them. So if the Switch 2 edition of Smash Bros. Ultimate came out in, say, late 2026, you could feasibly get away with not releasing the next game until 2028 or 2029 or whatever it may be, or even later. We waited 11 years for a new Mario Kart across 2 systems, and we stuck with Mario Kart 8 the entire time, and they did a very similar thing with the Booster Course pass. So I don't think it's too far-fetched to think that they would do a similar thing with a game that is probably more beloved than Mario Kart 8. Also, I will say, I personally enjoy this idea more than the reboot. I have a couple reasons for this, and the first is that the gameplay in Ultimate is already really good. While Smash Bros., aside from the first one, because it was the first one, always has very good gameplay. Smash Bros. Ultimate in general has easily the best gameplay for any platform fighter that exists. So I think that if I had a choice, I'd rather expand on the roster of a game that I know plays well, rather than take the chance that a new Smash Bros. Game will have as good gameplay as this one. I doubt that they're going to do a PlayStation All Stars Battle Royale type of thing, where they make the game completely different from the older games. I still think it would be preferable to stick with what we know is already fantastic. The other reason I think that Switch 2 version is better is because of the enhancements that you can give an already nearly perfect game. For one, I'll say that I have played Smash Bros. On the Switch 2 a lot, and I have noticed sometimes where the load times are bad or maybe even worse than the Switch 1. I'm not an expert in this type of stuff, so I could be wrong, but I'm sure that more stable frame rates when 8 players are on screen and things like that could definitely be fixed. As far as enhancements go, the main draw, of course, is the roster. I really want them to grow the roster they already have in the game more because the roster they have is already almost perfect. Like I said before, there's no guarantee that we're going to get maybe half the characters in this game back for the reboot, especially the third party characters. I think while it may seem crazy, it's not out of the realm of possibility that all the guest characters that we have could just not show up in the next game. I think there are a few characters that would have to stick around no matter what, like Sonic and Ryu and Pac-Man, but for the most part, there's no reason to say that Microsoft can't say that they're not allowed to use Steve in the next Smash Bros. Game. So I'd rather grow the roster that's already there than get new faces on a reduced roster. On top of this, all you have to do is add 11 characters, and you can literally put on the box of the Switch 2 version that it has 100 characters. That's a feat that very few fighting games will ever reach, especially ones that are not fan-made. Fan games are possible to reach that height because they're not under the time constraints or budgetary restraints that come from a company that is telling them how to run things. And for things like mods, they're just adding on top of what's already a pre-existing game. Anyways, if they're going to do a Mario Kart 8 thing of artificially expanding the lifespan of this game further than was originally intended, they could create several more DLC packs for these characters that everyone loves. On top of this, I also think it'd be relatively easy for them to add new characters and maybe a few music tracks here and there for them. Mario Kart 8's Booster Course Pass was heavily criticized for how many of their tracks looked bad in comparison to the base game because they were assets that were pulled from Mario Kart Tour, which is a mobile game. However, since this would most likely be original models, it would look like the game never changed or never even ended. So aside from the small blow that a few people would take that an entirely new Smash Bros. Game is still a ways off, I really don't think that there's a losing scenario here. On top of this, if you do a new Smash Bros. DLC pack or a few, you'll have access to characters that have become much more popular from now than they were back in 2018 or 2019 or whatever when the DLC was coming out originally. Someone like Hollow Knight and Hornet from the Hollow Knight and Silksong games have become even more popular than they ever were when the DLC was coming out. So adding them now or sometime this year compared to like 2029 when we're still waiting for the third game for the next 8 years or whatever, when their popularity is so high, would be a much better decision. I'm sure their inclusion will still be very welcome when that day comes, but you're going to get a much bigger impact when it's announced today or sometime this year rather than 4 or 5 years down the road. In fact, I could point to someone else who would be a great idea to add. I think that they should add another Street Fighter character. Street Fighter 6 is killing it right now, and with not only sales, but bringing back Street Fighter as a whole into the mainstream. In fact, Street Fighter even has a movie coming out this summer. So Street Fighter being as popular as ever, adding a character like Chun-Li would do wonders for the sales of the DLC. Sonic is in a similar boat as well. Sonic has debatably never been more popular than he is now, between his last couple of games being well received by fans, and the 3 movies coming out since Smash Bros. Ultimate ended its normal development, adding Dr. Eggman or Shadow would go over incredibly well now. It's not to say that it wouldn't have been well received during the original DLC or years from now, but people will love their inclusion now more than ever because of how popular they are. Personally, this is what I would do. I think it would be best if they made a Switch 2 edition of Smash Bros. Ultimate and had maybe 10 or 12 normal fighters and a couple of Echo fighters as a base launch new roster and include the past DLC for free because you know they're probably going to charge something like $70 to $80 anyway. After that, give us 2 or so DLC packs with 5 or 6 characters over the next 2 or 3 years, then release a reboot Smash Bros. At the end of the decade or at the start of the next. While I know that people really want a new Smash Bros. Game, and I do too, I think this is the best of both worlds in my opinion. People already almost universally love Smash Bros. Ultimate, so we can get an even more characters to an already almost perfect roster. Why would we not? If this is a very divisive game, like maybe even Smash Bros. Brawl, then I would understand why leaving it as it is and moving on to something new would be understandable and probably a good idea. But I can't find a single person who doesn't at least enjoy Smash Bros. Ultimate. So with a game so universally loved, why would you not add on to it? So that's just how I feel. Let me know in the comments down below. Do you agree? And do you think this is a good idea? Or would you rather have an entirely new game with or without the reboot aspect? Let me know in the comments below, and I'll see you all next time.